Do you have advice for people? You know, people whose lives don't work, and they tried their seeking, it still doesn't work. What would you say to someone like that?
Well, I could make several different answers to that, I suppose. From a non-duality angle, I'd say I have absolutely no advice for anybody. As a trained counsellor and counselling trainer myself, I've been professionally trained not to give advice anyway. But I mean, having said that, I mean, leaving that aside, I don't mean to be, entirely flippant. Leaving that aside, I'd say for a person who feels themselves to be uncomfortable and unhappy, there are many effective things which that person can do, which might well have the effect of making them feel less unhappy and less uncomfortable as a person. I don't feel that any of those things have anything to do with what we're talking about.
I understand, yeah.
But
it's helping the character, helping the personality become more balanced. Would you say that's what?
It may well be, yes, absolutely. I mean,
so they're happier as a human being, but
more comfortable.
Yeah.
Absolutely, yeah, absolutely, yeah. I mean, a common metaphor, it's in my book, but it's not my original metaphor, of course, is the metaphor of somebody who's in a prison, making the prison more comfortable. If we perceive ourselves to be in a prison, then probably the most sensible thing we can possibly do is to make that prison more comfortable. And what this is about is eventually seeing that there is no prison. And there is no person in the prison because there is no person. It's the very sense of being a person, that sort of sense of being somewhat contracted and somewhat constricted. It's that sense which creates the sense that I'm in a prison. But as long as that's there, and as long as there's a feeling, that I'm a person who can make choices about my life which will affect it for good or for ill, then probably about the most sensible thing I can do is learn a good practical meditation technique, maybe have some therapy of some kind if I feel that's appropriate, look after myself in innumerable ways. I mean, in a sense, it's not rocket science. I mean, if you and I wanted to spend the next little while kind of compiling a handbook for how to have a more contented life, I'm sure we could come up with something very effective in about 4 minutes. It isn't rocket science. And I would still say that none of that has anything to do with what we're talking about.
That's the
here.
frustrating thing,
That's
isn't
the
it?
frustrating thing.
That
it's very frustrating.
The ultimate solution, although that's not quite the right words, it seems you can't do anything about getting there. It either happens or it doesn't happen.
Yes, that is the ultimate frustration. Yeah. I mean, there are lots of different reactions from different people hearing this, of which being completely uninterested is probably the majority reaction. Most people probably just go away because they're not interested. But those who stay and listen because they are interested, one of the common reactions is anger. And that's certainly a reaction that I had when I heard this. It's very understandable. It's almost like, I'll use this metaphor because it pops into my head. It's a very violent metaphor, but it's almost going to hear somebody talking about this when we're seeking and when we're feeling unhappy and we want guidance. It's almost like having somebody slap you around the face. It can feel like that. I'm not saying it is, but it can be perceived like that. And anger's a very common reaction to hearing this. Yeah.
People that are close to you and have known you for a time, do they realise something significant's happened to you? Or do they just see you as the same Richard?
I don't know. I think you'd probably... I don't think I'm going to comment on that.
They don't say anything, or...?
I think I'm easier to get along with, but they might not agree. I think the sense of the contracted person often carries a lot of neurosis with it, and I think neurosis can make us difficult to be around for other people. And although I would insist that there are no necessary implications of this whatsoever, nevertheless I think again talking to other people, it's probably a fairly common experience that a certain amount of neurosis drops away. And that may have the effect of making the character easier to be around for other people. But I think ultimately you have to ask the other people about that.
Yeah. Okay, I promised Julian at your publishing company, the Non-Duality Press,
Yes.
that I'd do a little plug for the books
Oh,
at
wonderful.
the end.
Great
And the
stuff.
first one is I Hope You Die Soon, which is a really, on the face of it, a rather ironical title. Do you want to explain how you got that title?
I got that title from Tony Parsons. At a period of what I've already described as despair, I used to go and visit Tony at his meetings, and I also used to pester him on the phone and see if he had any advice, which of course he never did have. And I went up to him at the end of one of his meetings in despair, as I often was at that time, and he gave me a very warm hug and looked me in the eyes, and he just said, "I hope you die soon." And I thought that was a very, very kind thing for him to say in the context.
Yeah.
And so that became the title of the book. It is, of course, a metaphorical death that I'm talking about there, although that's a title that's often misunderstood by people.
Yes, I can imagine, actually, yeah. And you also have the Book of No One, which is just out, your
That's
new book.
literally hot off the presses.
Which is pretty thick, this one. It's kind of...
Indeed, yeah. There's an awful lot to be said about nothing.
It's mainly extracts from talks, is it?
It's talks and dialogues.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Okay. I want to thank you very much for coming in today, Richard.
Thank you.
And talking to Conscious TV. And thank you for watching Conscious TV. We'll see you again soon. Goodbye.